Good morning. Today I will be presenting on the numerical investigations of transition mechanism in a laminar suppression bubble for increasing Reynolds numbers. I'm a postdoc with Dr. Diwan at IISc, and this work has been done by Karthik, an MTech student of our group. He is here. And so the motivation to this talk comes from the adverse pressure gradient flow separation on aerofoils. And as Robin said, that in a boundary layer exhibits bypass transition at elevated free stream turbulences, and such a flow can also undergo separation under adverse pressure gradients. And in that circumstances, these boundary layer streaks interact with a span-wise vortex role shed by the separated boundary layer. And such an interaction can result in breakdown of the span-wise role in certain cases. And our interest is to see how these two interact and what happens in the downstream. So there have been studies previously, and the outcome of those studies were at low FST, the transition in a separated boundary layer happened through KH instability. When the FST is high, such KH instability has been bypassed, and furthermore, there have seen some 3D structures in the span-wise direction due to span-wise distortion of the coherent structures. So our objective is to understand such a transition mechanism and answer these questions. Can such an interaction between streaks and a span-wise vortex result in turbulent spots? And if such spots form, can we detect them by looking at the velocity signals, evolution of velocity fluctuations, and if we calculate the intermittency of such flows, and it happens that it agrees with the universal intermittency curve of Dhawan and Narasimha, in such a case, can we ascribe the route to transition as through formation of turbulent spots? So towards this, we have carried out DNS. Karthik has done simulations, and the code is developed by Dr. Saurabh Patwardhan. And the equations are non-dimensionalized with respect to inlet boundary layer displacement thickness and reference velocity. And so the grid that we have used is 200 in x direction, and in y direction 300 and 240 in span-wise direction, and solved the NS equations on a staggered grid. So, and on the top boundary, to induce separation because of adverse pressure gradient, U and V velocity profiles have been superimposed, which could result in displacement of the flow as an effect of adverse pressure gradient and separation. And we compared our grid with that of previous works in terms of wall normal units, and our simulations compare very well with that of previous studies in the same research. So the time mean profiles, the contours superimposed with streamlines, looks like a pocket of air that is, the fluid is displaced and then again reattaches. And for 3 Reynolds numbers, we have chosen Reynolds number based on displacement thickness. For a large bubble, it happens at 79.2, and for a shallow bubble, which is in the middle, is about 105.8. And in this case, in the last case, it was an attached flow, it was about 158.7. So we are essentially looking at varying the Reynolds numbers and looking at the change in transition mechanism. So there is a large separated flow at low Reynolds numbers, and at 105.8 there is very shallow bubble, and for the higher Reynolds number case it is an attached flow, and the CF also reflects the same, that there is a zero crossing line for both Reynolds numbers 79.2 and 105.8, which indicates the extent of streamwise extent of separated region. And if we see that the growth of disturbances in the upstream boundary layer, we see that there is an exponential growth in the beginning of separation, which marks as the linear region, and after that there is a departure from the exponential growth called as nonlinear region, and all the transitional effects are well pronounced in the nonlinear regions. So we examine the time history of wall streamwise and wall normal velocities in this region and look at the flow structures in this region. And this represents the variation of Reynolds stress, which indicates that transition in a separated flow happens with growth in velocity fluctuations that would manifest at the maximum height of the bubble. And that's what we have seen here. Because of the separated shear layer, the maximum Reynolds stress is at the maximum height of the bubble, and the local maximum in Reynolds stress happens towards reattachment. As the Reynolds number increased, that moved upstream and closer to the wall as we see the contours. And the cutoff here has been chosen based on the work of OL etc. all, where it's 0.001 is the cutoff towards the onset of transition. Following this, we examine the evolution of velocity, evolution of streamwise and wall normal velocity from in the second half of the bubble, and in a separated flow for a large bubble case, which is 79.2, we see some undulations, and there are no distinct regions of disturbances in the streamwise velocity. A and B are streamwise velocities, whereas C and D are wall normal velocities. Although the wall normal velocity shows a distinct region of disturbances, whereas the contours of U prime, spanwise variation of U prime, and as well as omega y does not show any spot-like structures, and furthermore there are no streaks in the upstream boundary layer, and the spanwise coherence of the spanwise roll is preserved. Whereas if we increase the Reynolds numbers, the streamwise velocity fluctuations show localized disturbances, especially at after 629, and the same is reflected in wall normal velocity also, and wall normal velocity shows such details with much clarity that these local disturbances which are akin to turbulent spots have appeared. And if we examine the spanwise variation of U prime, such structures are seen beyond 700. And as well as because of the streaks in the upstream boundary layer, there is some distortion in the spanwise roll. We will see this in clear when we examine the Q criterion. And when the flow is attached, there are sinuous undulations in the streamwise velocity, which are due to the undulations of the streaks in the spanwise direction. And there is a local growth of disturbances which are turbulent spots, and the same is very well reflected in growth of wall normal velocity fluctuations, and the spots are seen beyond 500 in spanwise variation of U velocity. Further, we have also done spectra, and the spectra calculations says that the product of K and H, K is the wave number and H is the shear layer thickness, that is well within the limits of KH instability by Chandrasekhar etc. all for both the cases. And F cut here, remind this, please bear this in your mind, that it is a cutoff frequency which we have chosen to remove the high frequency low frequency disturbances from the velocity signals, and then we have contested that against Imon's description of turbulent spots as localized regions, localized high frequency regions, and for a separated flow, for a large separated flow, we even after choosing cutoff and removing the low frequency content from the streamwise velocity, we did not see any local appearance of such structures. However, as the Reynolds number is increasing, we see such structures growing and more effectively in the attached flow case. So therefore, we examined the Q criterion of the flow, and this black line here indicates the time mean separation location of the flow. And in the upstream of separation for RE79.2, where there is a large separation bubble, there are no streaks in the upstream region. And we see that the span-wise coherence is preserved and the span-wise vortex breaks down to hairpin vortices and then reattaches and then grows into a turbulent boundary layer. As Reynolds number is increased, because of the streaks in the upstream of time mean separation that interact with the span-wise structures, that leads to distortion of the span-wise rolls, and that breaks down beyond 600. And whereas for an attached flow case, we see that streaks are well pronounced and there is no separation here, and we see lambda structures which break down at their tip and form turbulent structures, to small scale turbulence. Further, we compare our results with the universal intermittency of Dhawan and Narasimha. And in large separated flow case where KH instability is predominant and there are no streaks, we see that the comparison between Dhawan and Narasimha curves and our calculations following the work of Edley and Keffer and the wavelet analysis following Simon and Simoni, etc., all are in reasonably good agreement. Does that mean that the route to transition is through turbulent spots? But whereas the results which we examined doesn't say so. However, as the Reynolds number is increased and the flow progressed towards attached flow, such an conclusion can be deduced. But however, if we deduce such a conclusion that route to transition is through formation of turbulent spots where KH instability is predominant, that might be a conjecture. And so to summarize, at low Reynolds numbers where the boundary layer transition occurs through KH instability, inviscid instability, turbulent spots are not seen. However, the intermittency agrees well with that of universal intermittency of Dhawan and Narasimha. The reason for the good comparison between them is because of the growth of disturbances that leads to breakdown of span-wise structures. However, although at 105.8 Re delta star in, transition occurs through KH instability, but because of the interaction between the stream-wise streaks and the span-wise rolls from the separated layer, turbulent spots are seen, and such an conclusion can be deduced from comparisons. However, at high Re, there are sinusoidal oscillations in the evolution of velocity fluctuations, which are due to the oscillations of streaks, and that break down to localized high frequency disturbances, and they grow. The growth of such disturbances persists until the maximum skin friction coefficient location. Thank you.
Yeah, just time for a couple of quick questions. If there are no questions, let's thank Samsung again.